On out of here. I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly,
the sports world absolutely stopped spinning when the rumors hit the timeline claiming the unthinkable had just happened behind the closed doors of USA basketball. Whispers turned into a deafening roar across social media that two-time MVP A'ja Wilson had been quietly removed from the Team USA Olympic roster following a massive, explosive clash with rookie sensation Caitlin Clark. It sounded like pure fiction, the kind of wild internet speculation that usually gets shut down in minutes. But then the loudest voice in sports media grabbed a microphone and threw a gallon of gasoline on the fire. Stephen A. Smith went on national television and absolutely tore the lid off the heavily guarded secrets of the WNBA, confirming that the jealousy, the tension, and the locker room divides were not just real, but completely tearing the fabric of women's basketball apart. He exposed a level of petty resentment that most fans couldn't even fathom, painting a picture of a league where veteran superstars were supposedly so furious over the spotlight being hijacked by a 22-year-old rookie that they were willing to risk the entire financial future of the sport just to prove a point. But to understand how this insane narrative escalated to the point where fans actually believed the most dominant player on the planet was getting booted from the Olympic squad, you have to look at the shadows of what was really happening on the hardwood and in the corporate boardrooms. The truth of the matter is actually a brilliant twist of reality. Because while the internet was screaming about A'ja getting cut, the exact opposite had happened in secret. The Olympic Selection Committee had actually snubbed Caitlin Clark, leaving the most famous female athlete in the world sitting at home while the veterans packed their bags for Paris. A decision that triggered such massive public outrage that the rumor mill completely inverted the story out of pure chaos. But that wild misconception didn't come out of nowhere. It was born from a very real, very ugly culture war that Stephen A. Smith was entirely right about. When Caitlin entered the league, she didn't just bring fans. She brought chartered flights, sold-out arenas, and million-dollar television deals, forcing veterans who had spent a decade grinding for pennies to suddenly watch a rookie receive the royal treatment before she had even scored a single professional point. You could literally see the tension bleeding onto the court during the first few weeks of the season. Players weren't just defending Clark, they were sending messages. Hard elbows, blindside screens, and post-game press conferences filled with thinly veiled disrespect became the daily reality for the Indiana Fever star, leading analysts everywhere to question if the league was actively trying to sabotage its own golden goose. Stephen A. Smith couldn't take the silence anymore and erupted on First Take, going on a legendary rant where he essentially accused the established stars of being completely blinded by their own egos. He didn't hold back, using his massive platform to confirm that the whispers of a coordinated veteran freeze-out were entirely accurate. He pointed out that instead of embracing the tidal wave of cash and attention Clark was bringing to everyone's pockets, players were letting their pride turn the season into a hostile, toxic environment. And sitting right at the absolute center of this storm was A'ja Wilson, the undisputed face of the league, a player who had done everything right, won every award, and built a flawless resume, only to be completely overshadowed by a rookie who hadn't won a thing at the pro level. The breaking point for the rumors, the moment where the internet decided an ultimate clash had occurred, was deeply tied to the clandestine world of corporate shoe deals. Just days into her professional career, leaked reports revealed that Caitlin Clark had secured a staggering $28 million signature shoe contract with Nike, a frankly astronomical figure that sent shockwaves through the veterans' locker rooms. Meanwhile, A'ja Wilson, who was also a Nike athlete, had been waiting years for her own signature shoe, a glaring disparity that many felt was a massive slap in the face to athletes who had carried the league through its darkest financial eras. When A'ja finally got her shoe announcement shortly after the Clark news broke, Many fans felt it was a rushed PR move by Nike to quiet the growing outrage, further fueling the narrative that behind the scenes, these two camps were engaged in an absolute war for dominance and respect. When the USA Olympic roster was finally being debated in those dark committee rooms, you can only imagine the absolute nightmare the executives were facing. They had to choose between respecting the undeniable, hard-earned hierarchy of veterans led by Wilson, or bowing to the massive public and financial pressure to include Clark and capitalize on her millions of rabid fans. They ultimately chose the veterans, claiming it was a basketball decision based on experience. But the backlash was so severe, so incredibly vitriolic, that it birthed the very rumor this video started with. The public was so furious about Clark's exclusion that they began fabricating stories that the veterans were actually being punished, twisting the reality into a bizarre fantasy where Aja was the one facing the consequences of the clash. But while the roster removal rumor was ultimately a massive misconception, the underlying truth that Stephen A. Smith exposed remains entirely intact and wildly fascinating. He pulled back the curtain on a sports league experiencing growing pains in the most dramatic, painful way possible, proving that where there is revolutionary money, there will always be ruthless jealousy. This isn't just about playing time or Olympic medals anymore. It's about a fundamental shift in the power dynamics of professional sports, where a rookie's unprecedented popularity forced an entire establishment to look in the mirror. The story doesn't end with just a simple Olympic snub, because the shockwaves of this decision rattled the very foundation of the sports world, spilling over into daily television debates, podcasts, and millions of living rooms across the globe. Stephen A. Smith had already set the stage with his fiery declarations, but the deeper you dig into the timeline, the more you realize that the tension had been brewing long before Caitlin Clark ever stepped onto a professional court. It started back in the collegiate ranks, where Clark was pulling in viewership numbers that didn't just rival the men's game, but completely obliterated them, forcing a harsh spotlight onto a professional league that had been fighting for scraps of media attention for nearly 3 decades. The WNBA was built on the blood, sweat, and relentless hustle of legends who traveled on commercial flights, played back-to-backs with barely any recovery time, and signed contracts that required them to play overseas just to make a living wage. Then comes a phenomenal rookie from Iowa, a generational talent with unlimited shooting range, and suddenly the entire financial structure of the league flips upside down overnight. Private charter flights are suddenly approved. Massive corporate sponsors are suddenly knocking down the doors. Arenas that struggled to sell 3,000 tickets are suddenly packed to the rafters, with celebrities sitting courtside. And while from the outside this looks like a massive victory for everyone involved, inside the locker rooms, it created an absolute powder keg of resentment. You have to put yourself in the shoes of a veteran like Aja Wilson, a generational powerhouse in her own right, a multi-time champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and arguably the most dominant two-way player the women's game has ever seen. She spent years perfecting her craft under the tutelage of Las Vegas Aces head coach Becky Hammon, building a dynasty that was supposed to be the main storyline of the league. Yet, everywhere she looked, every sports network she turned on, the conversation wasn't about her back-to-back championships. It was about a rookie who was struggling to adjust to the physicality of the professional game. The media narrative became completely skewed, and the veterans felt entirely erased from their own league's history. This wasn't just a simple case of basketball jealousy. It was a profound clash of cultures and generations. Stephen A. Smith recognized this immediately, which is why he refused to back down when his peers challenged his take. He saw that the established players were viewing Clark not as a savior, but as a privileged newcomer who was being handed the keys to a kingdom they had built with their bare hands. And the physical reality of this resentment played out in real time, on national television, night after night. Opposing teams weren't just playing hard defense against the Indiana Fever. They were sending physical, bruising messages. There were controversial hip checks, aggressive traps, and verbal altercations that went far beyond standard basketball trash talk. It became a league-wide initiation process that looked suspiciously like a coordinated effort to break the rookie's spirit. Fans watched in absolute shock as Clark was knocked to the hardwood repeatedly, while referees swallowed their whistles and opposing coaches deflected questions in the post-game pressers. The silence from the league's veterans regarding the aggressive treatment only fueled the fire, leading to explosive segments where Stephen A. Smith demanded accountability from the faces of the WNBA. He called out the hypocrisy of wanting more eyes on the game, but actively punishing the player who brought those eyes. And the controversy didn't stop at the edge of the basketball court. It bled deeply into the corporate suites, where the real money is made. The $28 million Nike deal was just the tip of the iceberg. Gatorade, State Farm, Panini America, everyone wanted a piece of the new golden goose, leaving established superstars fighting for the remaining crumbs of corporate sponsorship. The optics of A'ja Wilson, the reigning Finals MVP, playing in generic sneakers while a rookie debuted a massive global marketing campaign, was a bitter pill that the WNBA community simply could not swallow quietly. It sparked fierce, passionate debates about marketability, historical erasure, and the systemic inequalities that have historically plagued women's sports. When you understand this incredibly toxic, high-pressure environment, the bizarre Olympic rumor suddenly makes perfect sense. The public was so accustomed to seeing the veterans push back against the new wave that they easily believed a physical or verbal altercation had forced USA Basketball to make a drastic roster move. The reality, of course, was much more calculated and bureaucratic. The selection committee, filled with old-school basketball minds, looked at the roster and decided they weren't going to let public pressure dictate their process. They chose the proven winners, the players who had spent years in the USA basketball system, effectively telling the world that international gold medals are not won by television ratings or shoe contracts. But by snubbing Clark, they accidentally poured 1 million gallons of rocket fuel onto the very fire they were trying to avoid. They created a martyr out of the rookie, a narrative that she was being unfairly blackballed by an elitist establishment, which in turn unleashed a tidal wave of unprecedented hate toward the veterans who did make the team. A'ja Wilson, instead of being celebrated for another incredible Olympic milestone, found her social media flooded with angry fans demanding to know why she was allegedly freezing out the new face of the sport. It became a no-win situation for everyone involved. If the veterans spoke out to defend themselves, they were accused of being bitter and petty. If they stayed silent, they were accused of being complicit in a massive conspiracy. Stephen A. Smith masterfully navigated this incredibly complex web of drama, using his booming voice to articulate what everyone was thinking, but was too afraid to say out loud. He pointed out that the WNBA was finally getting the NBA-level drama it had always wanted, but it wasn't prepared for the absolute sheer toxicity that comes with it. Men's sports have thrived on these types of bitter rivalries for decades. Think about the bad blood between the Detroit Pistons and Michael Jordan's Bulls, or the fierce, physical wars between the Celtics and the Lakers in the 80s. Those clashes weren't polite. They were brutal, personal, and heavily debated, and they ultimately skyrocketed the league to unprecedented financial heights. The women's game was now experiencing its own version of the bad boys era. But because it was completely new territory, everyone was reacting with shock and outrage instead of recognizing it as the ultimate catalyst for growth. The rumor mill went into such extreme overdrive because the fans were starving for a villain, a hero, and a dramatic storyline to anchor their new obsession. They wanted the sensationalism. They wanted the narrative of a secret backroom brawl, resulting in A'ja Wilson getting kicked off the team. Because frankly, it makes for an incredible story. It plays right into the deep-seated psychological need for sports to be a real-life soap opera. And while the truth was that no one was removed and the roster remained intact, the undeniable friction between the old guard and the new revolution had permanently altered the atmosphere of every single game played. Every interaction, every missed high five, every hard foul is now analyzed, like the Zapruder film, by millions of armchair detectives looking for proof of the feud. It's a level of scrutiny that simply didn't exist a year ago. And the wild part is, this is exactly what the sport needed to survive and thrive. The polite, quiet era of women's basketball is officially dead and buried. It has been replaced by a ruthless, highly profitable, and relentlessly entertaining era of superstars fighting for their legacy, their money, and their ultimate respect. So when you hear voices like Stephen A. Smith sounding the alarm and exposing the gritty reality of what's happening behind the scenes, realize that he's not tearing the game down. He's actually elevating it to the main stage where it belongs. He's treating these incredible athletes with the exact same critical lens he applies to LeBron James or Kevin Durant, which is the ultimate sign of respect. The friction, the rumors, the dramatic snubs, and the multi-million-dollar shoe wars are all vital chapters in a story that is currently being written at light speed. The veterans like Aja Wilson are fighting a war to maintain the respect and hierarchy they bled for, while the newcomers are riding a tidal wave of mainstream momentum that simply refuses to be slowed down. The clash is real. The stakes have never been higher, and while the internet might get the facts wrong from time to time, the underlying truth is clear. The league is on fire, and nobody is looking away. This spectacular drama isn't just contained to a single season or a handful of press conferences. It is an evolving saga that promises to dictate the future of women's sports for the next decade. To truly grasp the magnitude of the situation, we have to look at the historical context of how superstars are treated when they shatter the status quo. Consider the incredible journey of icons who came before this current crop of players. The trailblazers who laid the foundation did so in relative obscurity, fighting tooth and nail just to keep franchises from folding. They played in aging arenas, dealt with miserable travel conditions, and fought an uphill battle against a mainstream sports media that largely ignored their existence, unless it was an Olympic year. Now, juxtapose that gritty, unglamorous history with the absolute circus that surrounds Caitlin Clark today. The dichotomy is jarring. When Clark steps off a team bus, she is greeted by screaming throngs of fans, a swarm of paparazzi, and a level of security typically reserved for heads of state. This jarring reality check isn't lost on the veterans. Aja Wilson, who has poured her soul into elevating the Las Vegas Aces to a global brand, has watched this transition with a